here. Same thing. Okay, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the Sabbath that's coming. Some may already be experiencing the Sabbath hours, but we ask, Lord, that your presence can be here in our midst, that you can enlighten our minds, that you can bring us close to you and to one another. We ask, Lord, that as we continue this study of the sanctuary, that you can help us to see the connections, that you can strengthen our intellect and bring to remembrance the things that you've taught us in the past. Help me to present clearly and simply. And we pray for those people who are watching these videos, that you can be close to them. Help us to correct any errors that we may have in our thinking or understanding. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, good evening, everyone. And very thankful for the people that are here. Because it's not, I haven't had to do it yet, but one day I may have to do a presentation when there's no one else here. That sometimes happens, but people have been faithful in showing up to these studies. And this study is going to be a very interesting study. I'm not sure exactly what direction it's going to go, but I'm going to review a little bit from last week and look today at Genesis chapter 5. Now, I'm not sure how far we're going to get into Genesis. I haven't really decided, because we're doing a study on the sanctuary from Eden lost to Eden restored. And so here we're looking at Eden, but we're not going to go through all of Genesis. We're going to touch on different things. Now, particularly last week, we were looking at the curse, and that was the curse of Cain. And Cain also had the land being cursed. So this seems to be an addition to the curse that was given to Adam regarding the land. And what particularly was the curse? Do you remember what Genesis 4, what the curse was for Cain? Anybody remember?
The thistles.
Okay, so it says here, because of the blood of Abel that ends up in the ground, when thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. And also he's going to be a fugitive and a vagabond. So that's what it talks about here. Now, when we go back to the curse in chapter 3, it's going to talk about the thistles and the thorns. So there's a difference here. So the thistles and the thorns is the curse that's given in chapter 3 to the ground. And also that Adam's going to return to the ground. But in chapter 4, the curse that Cain experiences is that the ground will not yield unto thee her strength. So for Cain personally, he's no longer going to be able to be a gardener. So this is more a curse particularly for Cain himself. Now, we touched on this a little bit, but what does this mean? Why do you think God's doing this? And I think I sort of asked this question.
I think that part of the reason was he knew that he was supposed to bring a lamb, but God required the death of a lamb, and he decided he was going to bring produce.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so God, okay, then you're just going to not be able to bring forth fruit from the earth.
Okay. So because he's one who tills the ground, God is saying, well, I'm going to take this away from you. But is there
Yeah.
something more symbolic here?
I think it's a curse against trying to find salvation through our own works.
Okay, so that's part of it, but I'm talking more about symbolic in the sense of, can we, and we did try to connect this, but we connect this to Leviticus 26? That is the curse in Leviticus 26 for not keeping the Sabbath rest of the land?
Yes.
Okay, and the reason why I asked this question is because we have this 7 times curse that's going to happen to anyone who's going to hurt Cain, right? Punished sevenfold. And so my idea here is that in Genesis, we end up with these symbols that show up, and they become amplified or unfolded as God continues to unfold revelation to humanity. That is, these become as seeds, pardon the pun, of truth that are then going to unfold. So these seeds regarding the curse of the ground, that it would not yield her strength, is going to be tied to Leviticus 26 curse, which is dealing with the 7 years sabbatical rest of the land not being observed. So if you don't observe the sabbatical rest of the land is not going to yield her strength, right? So this is a particular point. So that means you're not going to be able to produce enough to live off of. So Adam has a curse of the ground. That means he's going to have to labor, but the land is going to at least provide for him. But for Cain, that's not going to be the situation. When you look at Leviticus 26, and we look at particular dealing with this, it says, but if you hearken not unto me and will not do all these commandments, and ye shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that ye will not do all my commandments, but that ye break my covenant, I will also do this unto you. I'll even appoint over you terror, consumption, the burning ague, which is a type of fever, that shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And ye shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I will set my face against you, that ye shall be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you. And ye shall flee when none pursueth, right? So it doesn't go into this in the next one, when it says in verse 20, and your strength shall be spent in vain, for the land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the lands yield their fruits, right? Now, this is under the curse of the first 7 times. So this curse, the first 7 times, is similar in sense to the curse of Cain regarding the land. So that means when he's going to have this 7 times, that somebody who slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold, or 7 times. And then also you have this mark set upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So there's going to be this warning or mark for Cain that you're not going to kill Cain. That God is, because he's a fugitive and a vagabond. And Cain says, I can't live like that. Somebody's going to kill me, right? So we can see that this 7 times is connected to this. And then we also looked at Lamech. Now, this is the Lamech who's the descendant of Cain. And he also has this curse, which is 70 times 7, for anyone who's going to avenge Lamech for this death. Now, initially, I always believed it was worse because there was 2 people that were slain. But in doing some research, at least in the little that I've done, I haven't done maybe enough, but I haven't found any indication that this is actually 2 people that it seems that this is more something like manslaughter. And so since Lamech's sin in this case would be sort of less than Cain's sin, then in this situation, so maybe manslaughter or self-defense, then if he's going to be avenged sevenfold, that is Cain is, then Lamech says truly he should be avenged 70 and sevenfold. That is, if somebody seeks to hurt Lamech, kill Lamech, that that person would be avenged 70 and sevenfold. So I'm not adamant about any of this. If somebody finds something that says something different, I'd be happy to be corrected. But it just seems to me in my recent study that this is probably what's happening. Now, the similarity between this Lamech and the Lamech of Genesis 5, Adam's descendants, becomes extremely important. And it becomes important for our history. And what I wanted to look at today is really the study of the two Lamechs. But I think that we can see some more than we've seen in the past. Now, in this genealogy, there's lots of things in it, but one of the main points that we have noticed, which I'm going to draw on the board, has to do with Enoch. Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and their connection to Noah. So we know that Enoch, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. But Enoch was 65 years old when he begat Methuselah. And the significance of that comes into play. One is we know that 65 is the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 7. And then also Methuselah is going to be 187 years old when he begets Lamech. And then Lamech's going to live 777 years. Now, Stephen has noticed some details here. One is where it says Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. That's Genesis 5:25. So we know that that's connected to this, to the structure of the 777. So I'm going to draw this. I know some of you are very familiar with this. Some of you remember it, but maybe couldn't draw it out. But we're going to at least start here, and then connecting this to the sanctuary. That's going to be the thing that I'm really trying to lead to. So this is just some stuff from Thursday. I need to erase. And I find this interesting in doing this study on the sanctuary, because we're looking at things that we had looked at before, but I don't think I'd always connected them to the sanctuary in the way that we're going to connect them. But we should have seen this. So we're going to have Enoch. So Enoch lives 65 years, and then we're going to have Methuselah. And then you're going to have Methuselah live to be 187 years old. And then you're going to have Lamech. And Lamech is going to live to be 777 years. Now, one of the interesting things about this is 252 years. So we know that's 1/10 of a 2520. And this pattern of 252 years shows up in the structural chiasm ending in 1798 and going all the way back to the story of Joseph. But here we have two important symbols. This one is a symbol from the 2520, and this is a symbol from the 2520. And this symbol here is, of course, July 18th. And this 777 years becomes a symbol that we had connected to 777 days. Now, in my study of the two Lamechs, as I had gone through before, 490 years is 70 times 7. So that's the Lamech who's the descendant of Cain. Now, we know that there's 7 times 7 years here, 7 weeks, and then you have the 1 week here, and then you have the 62 weeks in the middle. And 62 weeks is 434 years. So that's 31 times 7 plus 31 times 7. I'm doing it this way for a reason. And 31 times 7 is 217, is 217 years, plus 217 years. So what's 217 a symbol of?
Midnight.
Midnight, July 7th, right? The 21st day of the 7th month. And we also have it, the Battle of Raphia in 217 on June 22nd. Correct? Is that correct? So we have all of these symbols that show up here. Now, I say I divide it like this because Jesus is crucified in 31 AD, right? So I'll do it, maybe I'll do it this way. You got this week here, right? That's 7 years, but it's 3.5 and 3.5. And in that midst of the week, it's 31 AD that divides this week. And 62 can be divided into 31. So 31 divides this into 2, 62 can be divided into 2 as 31. And then we also get this number of years. But the other thing is if I take 7 times 7 times 7, so I'm just going to do this times 7, I get 343. And if I take 434 and 343 and I add them together, I get 777. So in the story of Lamech, we can tie these two different Lamechs together. And this is in Genesis. But they're tied together with a symbol dealing with the curse. And Jesus is going to be a curse, right? That he's going to be made a curse for us. He's going to be hung upon a cross in the midst of the week in a structure that is based upon the two Lamechs. Now, this Lamech, of course, is not a curse. This Lamech is a blessing, if you want to look at it that way. But of course, he's going to be the father of Noah, and Noah is going to be the one who is going to be involved in the flood. But so this 7777, though, ties this Lamech, a good Lamech, with a bad Lamech. But it ties it together, and you can see here, Christ is good, but he's going to be tied to this cross, which is bad. It's a symbol of evil. But he's going to be made a curse for us, that he can redeem us. So the 777, the number 7, even though it's involved in this curse, it's also about redemption or forgiveness. So it's one of the disciples, I think it's Peter, but in Matthew's gospel, if I remember correctly, how many times shall I forgive my brother if he sin against me? Unto 7 times, Jesus says unto 70 times 7. So we can see that we have the 70 times 7 connected to a curse with the bad Lamech, but it's also about forgiveness. So that it's a symbol of this redemption that's happening because of sin. And when we look at Genesis, we look at the creation of the world, we have the creation of the world. In 6 days, God rests the 7th day. And we know that that's symbolic of God's recreative power. in restoring us from sin. That is, we have to be recreated. Now, I don't know if I went through this too quickly because I've gone through this before. But one of the things that Stephen notices is that when it talks about Lamech being born, and the verse there was Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. So that's going to be Genesis 5 verse 2. Now, one of the things about that, of course, we know, so imagine this is our period. We're going to get rid of Lamech here. We'll put November 9th, and we're going to put December 25th. So we know that this was divided, but July 18th has 252 days and 525 days. So July 18th is connected to the 525. Can we see that? So Genesis 5:25 becomes this symbol. Now, I've addressed in the morning meetings that sometimes people will just find verses. They'll find a number and they find a verse, and then they try to give some kind of meaning to it. It's not what we're doing here. The verse has already been given to us as one of the primary verses to understand this history. And so I don't think that we can just dismiss Genesis 5:25 in that way. But I'm not going to go through all the 5:25s and say, well, because I read something that sounds interesting, that it's significant. But we do have some Bible verses that do address this, that they address with this symbol 5:25 and 52. So I'm going to look these verses up because I can't remember which ones they were. But you're going to find a verse in the Bible that's the identical verse, that it's going to be in one place and in another place, and basically is the same verse. And this is see if I can remember where I have to go. No, that's the wrong place. Let's see if I can remember what the verse is. Here it is. Is that right? I should have looked this up earlier because I can't remember the verse, but it's just something I'm probably nobody knows what I'm talking about. It's going to be Jeremiah. There it is. Just hang on a sec. This has to do with Babylon. It's in Jeremiah 52, and I just can't remember which verse it is. Jeremiah 52 and 2 Kings 25. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I think it's yeah, there's this one, and okay, yes, there it is. So if you look at 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 2. So I'm going to show you this here. I should have figured it out. So this relates to the 525 and the 777. So 2 Kings 25:2 says, the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And then if we go to Jeremiah, you go to Jeremiah 52, verse 5, we have the same verse. So the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So what is this telling us when we put these two verses together? 2 Kings 25:2 and Jeremiah 52, verse 5. Is this something that we would just see as, is this simply just finding a verse that fits what we want? Let's put it that way.
No.
No. So this is something where we can look at a verse and we can, it's not subjective. That is, we haven't done anything subjective here. We found these two verses, 25:2 and 52:5, in Jeremiah and 2 Kings, and they're identical. So that doesn't happen very often. But when we put the two together, we can see it's 777. So does that make sense to people? That this isn't sort of contrived in any way. Now, what about what's occurring here too? The city was besieged unto the 11th year of Zedekiah. So what is it? What's the topic? So we didn't just find two verses that happened to add up to 777, that happened to be the same verse. The question is, what is the topic? What happens in the 11th year of Zedekiah? What is that based upon? Is this a prophecy or fulfillment of the 7 times? Right? 2 Kings 25, verse 2, and Jeremiah 52, verse 5. That these equal 777 is tying us to a symbol that is dealing with the 7 times. Now, this is going to be the 4th 7 times. That is, the first 7 times going to be Manasseh's captivity, the second one Daniel's, the third Jehoiachin's captivity, and then the 4th is going to be Zedekiah's captivity. And that's what this is going to be talking about. It's going to be talking about Zedekiah being taken captive, but it's starting with a verse that's identical. So when we deal with this idea of this symbol, we're actually going to this here. And the 70th week we know that this is about the redemption of Christ. Now, is the 70th week telling us something about the sanctuary message that goes way back to the story of Genesis? Is it telling us something about what Jesus is doing by being tied to these symbols of 70 times 7 and 7, the 7 times, and also to the 2 Lamechs? You see what I'm asking you to do? I'm asking you to look at something that is tied together, and to see clearly that it's tied together, that it's not something subjective. It's not that we're not picking and choosing. So can we agree that this study on the 2 Lamechs that gives us this symbol of 777 is addressing the sanctuary, the work of redemption? Now, one of the reasons why I bring up that I think Lamech, that what's being talked about there is, we know about the cities of refuge. Can anybody tell me what the cities of refuge are for?
If you kill someone inadvertently, you can go to these cities of refuge and the family cannot come after you.
Okay, now as far as inadvertently, there you may actually have killed somebody on purpose, but they can't prove that you killed them on purpose, right?
Correct.
Right, because if you don't have 2 or 3 witnesses, if you're out working in the bush and something happens and the guy you're working with is killed, if there's no witnesses, I mean, you could have murdered him, right? The family could say, well, those guys had a grudge and he threatened him, and we think that he really did this on purpose. It wasn't an accident. But God says no, he can go to this city of refuge. Now, in Cain's sense, can we look at the 7 times curse? Is that sort of a city of refuge for Cain, even though he did murder?
Yes.
Yeah. And the same with what happens with Lamech. When he kills a man to his wounding or to his hurt. The question is, was this manslaughter or maybe self-defense or something like that? It's hard to know from the language. But he says that if somebody kills him, that they should be, paid back 70 times 7. I'm not sure necessarily what that means, but, in practical terms, but definitely in symbolic language, we can see that this is about redemption. And the cities of refuge are what? What are they actually symbolizing? So first off, let's say I kill somebody. The first thing that I need to do is to go to a city of refuge. I don't go and tell the family, according to this sort of scenario there, that I accidentally killed someone. I go to a city of refuge first. Why would I do that?
Because otherwise there's a party that could bring vengeance upon you.
Yeah.
And they can't go after you in a city of refuge.
Right. And you may then have a trial. Right. So you can go to this city of refuge, but it could be determined that you were innocent.
Right.
And you may end up being reconciled to, once it's determined that you're innocent, they don't have a right to kill you.
They don't have a right to seek vengeance.
Right, to seek vengeance. Okay. So Christ is also like a city of refuge. We are being accused by the accuser of the brethren, and we go to Christ, and we in a sense enter into the city of refuge until this issue is resolved. So there is an aspect there that is connected to the sanctuary, because is the sanctuary what happens on a daily basis like the city of refuge when we offer our sin offering,
Nice point, yes.
Yeah, so something is being put off. So there's this idea that's being expressed when Cain commits murder, and it's being reiterated in the story of Cain's descendant Lamech. That there is some kind of protection for the sinner or the person accused of sin. Now, when we see the second Lamech, who has this 777, what we see is this structure here that illustrates both of these things, the curses and God's redemption. And it's tied, of course, to the curse of the land. So remember, Adam sinned, he gets a curse of the land. That's going to be the thorns and the thistles that he's going to have to work by the sweat of his brow. But with Cain, when the land's cursed, it does not yield its strength. That's like the 7 times curse. That's like the first 7 times curse. But the land's not going to yield her increase. So we can see that the 7 times is about redemption. It's about salvation. It's about the sanctuary. And these symbols and ideas in Genesis are going to be used by God to demonstrate his redemptive power for humanity by this number 7. 7 is a number of God's creative power and also a number of his redemptive power. Now, somebody looking at this from the outside, I always try to think how people would see this, because we're Seventh-day Adventists, and we know a lot of things that the average person doesn't know. But I think sometimes that could actually get in the way of our understanding, because I think somebody looking from the outside, and I've presented some of these ideas to non-Adventists, they readily seem to recognize the significance of the Sabbath, the symbol of God's creative power in redeeming us, and that God would use these periods of time to illustrate that. Now, Seventh-day Adventists can agree with this one, but they don't want to agree with the 2520. And what's the problem with that? When a Seventh-day Adventist is presented with the 7 times of Leviticus 26, what's the problem with that? Why can he just accept this, but not accept the 2520? What happens when he does that?
Because they don't want to accept the fact that if they're not following properly in God's law, that there would be a curse.
Okay. Now, so one of the things that people have said to me about the 2520 is that God's not going to curse the Jews for 20 years. That's unfair. But yet, did God curse humanity for 6,000 years?
Yes.
Okay. And did he curse the earth in different stages? And those curses still exist?
Yes.
Yeah. So to say that God's not going to curse somebody for 20 years, well, you're really denying all of these curses. Now, Leviticus 26, the fact that I could tie Leviticus 26, this idea of this curse of the land to the curse of Cain. So the 7 times is connected to Cain. I think is quite important to understanding the connection. And as we've done here, we've connected Cain and Lamech to the 70 weeks. But the 70 weeks doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It comes from Leviticus 26. And we know that because the reason that they're going to have the land rest for 70 years in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 19 to 21, they're going to end up quoting Leviticus 26 because the land did not rest in her Sabbaths when you dwelt upon it. It's going to be rest now for 70 years. In Leviticus 26, it doesn't say how long, but now they quoted that. And so we know that the reason the land rested for 70 years is because from the anointing of Saul in 1097 to the captivity of Daniel in 607, there's 490 years. And in that 490 years, there's 7 sabbatical years that the land did not rest. And so now it's going to have to rest for 70 years. So Jeremiah is recognizing, because Jeremiah is writing this around the time of Daniel's captivity, where he talks about the 70 years. And then in 2 Chronicles 36, it's going to give you very specifically why it's 70 years, because of the curse of Leviticus 26. But we can see that this 490 that Daniel's concerned about, he's concerned about this 70 years, right? Because he wants to know when this 70 years is over and God's going to show his good word concerning them and causing them to return to this place, right? So he knows the Babylon has fallen, their 70 years is over from 609 to 539, October 609 to October 539. And now he wants to know about the end of the 70 years. So in Daniel chapter 9, he wants to know about the end of this, but God's going to give him another period of 490 years. So it's based upon this 490 that there's even this 490 to begin with. And if Seventh-day Adventists knew this, this would be extremely powerful. Now, someone can say, well, this is very complicated. And I've actually had this explanation by a pastor who I showed these things to. And he says, well, that's all fine and nice, but it's not going to work in evangelism, because basically, he didn't say it this way, but people are too slow. I mean, this is too complicated, is what he said. Now, I find that that's not the case, because when I've shown these things to non-Adventists, people who aren't really biblically literate, they don't see it as complicated. Now, we see this with the 2520. People will say it's too complicated, but the 2520 is simpler than the 2300 days. Would we agree with that statement? Do people think that the 2520 is simpler than the 2300 days? I mean, we're Seventh-day Adventists, we're very familiar with the 2300 days. But have you ever given a study on the 2300 days and a study on the 2520s, the prophetic mirror? And if you have, can you say which one is easier?
I don't know that I would say that one is easier than the other, but your point is taken. It would be easier to explain the prophetic mirror based upon the 7 times than for many people to come to an understanding of the 2,300 Arab and Boker, because then you're having to explain to them that this is also tied in with that 490 years or 70 weeks.
So one of the things about the 2300 days is I actually have quite a few things I have to explain. With the 2520, I could show it to people in 20 minutes on a napkin in a restaurant, which I've done. And they can see it, or on, to a student during a lesson. I've done that, near the end of the lesson, they got extra time after. Not going to take up a whole lesson doing a Bible study, but I can show it to them quite simply and they can see it. But if I try to show them the 2300 days, it's hard for them to understand the significance of it without showing them the 70 weeks. And the 70 weeks has a lot of little complexities in it. And then, I have to study Daniel 8, and I really have to look at those Bible verses. Where with Leviticus 26, I don't really have to do a lot. I mean, I can go to Isaiah chapter 7 usually, and then I can show them a few verses, but I don't have to really go into detail about Daniel 8 and Daniel 9. Now, the other thing is, people will say, well, it's so complicated. Now, often what they're talking about, the 2520 being complicated, is all of the garbage that's been dumped upon it. That is, they have to go through all of these websites and read all the stuff against the 2520 and try to sort out whether the 7 times is an intensity or not, right? Well, the same thing happens with the 2300 days. Seventh-day Adventists have had to write volumes and volumes of books to defend the 2,300 days. It's not like the 2,300 days is just, a short study and everybody kind of agrees. But with the 25-20, you have some of the same problems. So you're going to have, in the arguments against something, you're going to have some difficulties. But I find that 25-20 is actually simpler to prove than the 2,300 days. And in fact, the way that I prove the 2,300 days is I first show the 25-20, and that illustrates that the 2,300 days dating is correct, and the 70 weeks. I tie all these things together, the 1260 and so forth. And it's like, well, this all just fits together in this perfect puzzle. So you're much more likely, if you're not an Adventist and you see somebody, if I go through, and I have done this, through the various studies, first starting with the 25-20, then the 70 weeks, then the 2,300 days and the 1260s, so the two 25-20s, two 1260s, I mean, within Northern Israel, and I go through it. Well, they can start to see this fits together in this big puzzle that is very convincing. Now, it should be convincing for Adventists. Now, anyway, that's kind of a little bit an aside of what I was asking the question about, because the question really had to do with the significance of the 70 weeks. That is, if I don't understand the curse of Cain and the curse of Lamech, and I don't understand the connections between the two Lamechs in creating this structure here, if I don't understand the 490 years that precedes the 70 years Babylonian captivity, and the 490 years between the two dedications of the temple, then this just seems to come out of nowhere. But also the meaning of it is lessened. That is, it's not, its significance of why this structure exists in the first place is, why do we have a Jubilee cycle and a sabbatical cycle? Well, that's Leviticus 25. Why do we have 62 weeks in the middle? Is that just an arbitrary fact that exists and it's not significant? But if I can show that this is a division of 31 weeks, two periods of 31 weeks, and that Christ is crucified in 31, then I have some reason for the structure that strengthens it. But for me, the most powerful thing is when I go to 1863 and I look at the 1863 chart, when the prophetic mirror ends, and I see the week of Christ, and I see the prophetic mirror in the week of Christ, I now have something that's so powerful regarding God's church, the Seventh-day Adventist church, that's denominated in 1863, that's set up to do a specific work. To me, it was just extremely powerful in understanding that. And the 2,604 year prophetic mirror doesn't become just some curiosity. It becomes a powerful tool to give meaning to Adventism, to help us to understand why we're Seventh-day Adventists. So we know that what is the foundational message and the central pillar of Adventism?
2,300 days.
The 2,300 days in connection with the sanctuary. So one of the things that we know is that the 2,300 days is about the sanctuary, but the 70 weeks is about the sanctuary. But it's telling us something about what the sanctuary is. The truth behind the sanctuary has to do with this cross in 31 AD, the curse, right? So we have the first curses in the Bible in Genesis 3, in Genesis 4. We have these curses. And we see that these curses are actually tied to redemption. That is, the reason God curses the ground is redemptive. The reason why he curses the serpent, this is a symbol of Christ coming and conquering the serpent. The reason why he curses Eve is for her salvation, and a symbol of what the woman symbolizes as far as salvation, the church. The church has to go through suffering in order to give birth to Christ, till Christ's character is perfectly reproduced in his people. And the curse of Cain and the curse of Lamech, these are all significant symbols of salvation, and they're all connected to the sanctuary. And that the sanctuary truth is based upon time. Ellen White doesn't say the central pillar of Adventism and the foundation of Adventism is the sanctuary. She says the sanctuary in connection with the 2300 days. We have a time prophecy that without it, the sanctuary doctrine becomes meaningless, because this time prophecy ties us to the past, to the significant events that are being symbolized, that are symbolizing this work of redemption. It ties us to the 70 weeks, to the week of Christ, and to all these periods of time, and all these numbers and all these symbols are purposeful on God's part. He uses them from the story of Genesis, and they're going to be expanded upon throughout the scriptures. And then we see in the book of Revelation, they now bloom and bear fruit in very powerful ways, so that the things that are seeds in Genesis are now full grown, prosperous truths that are needed for us to go through the time that we have to go through, which is the time of Jacob's trouble specifically. So these symbols, this 252 and this 525, 1 Kings 25:2 and Jeremiah 52:5, in the 11th year of Zedekiah, right, up to the 11th year of Zedekiah, you're going to see that God has been warning us in the past. Now, in our 777 structure, we can look back in the past, and we have drawn conclusions, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail here, but we have drawn conclusions about what our structure means. And one of the things that Jeff has always said is that this is about the building of the temple. This is about a house for Christ to dwell in. This is about a people that God is preparing so that he can live in his people. And we may have been mistaken in regard to some of the events that we were predicting, but it doesn't mean that the symbols that were given to us can just be brushed aside or ignored. So we've dealt with that in the morning studies. Now, we're going to go back and look at some more things here. Oops. So Genesis chapter 5, this is the generations of Adam. Now we know, we talked about this seed of the woman, and that the reason that you have this genealogy is that we're going to be tying Christ as being a descendant of Adam, but also he's going to be a descendant of David. That is, we're showing his genealogy. He's going to be a son of Abraham. And so God has given us this chronology for us to count back, not just so that we have a curiosity of when the world began, but so that we can understand the connection of this story that we saw in Genesis 3 with the seed of the woman, that we're going to understand the connection of that story to Revelation, to the events at the end of the world. Now, I know, we could spend a lot of time on this genealogy, but, we're going to have Lamech, and he's going to live for 777 years. You see that in Genesis 5:31. All the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Now, Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years and begat sons and daughters. And he was 82 when he had a son Noah, right? And Lamech's going to then live for 595 years. And Noah's going to be 600 years when the flood begins. So how old is Lamech? How many years does he die before the flood?
5 years.
Yeah, 5 years before the flood. Now, what's the significance of that?
Well, I was going to ask the question in this way.
Yeah,
If, given what you were just addressing, the fact that his father was 182 when Noah was born,
182. Yeah,
and given that his son was 595
mhm.
when he died, is Noah's name predictive of Lamech's death?
And Noah's name means he shall have rest or something like that.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Now, I know I'm being a little odd for some people because I'm pronouncing the name as Noach,
Yeah.
but I believe that's more proper than Noah because the name Noah in Hebrew means wanderer.
Right. Yeah, it's Noah, but we hardly pronounce any of the names the way they're really pronounced.
Okay.
I mean, because we'd have to do like the Scottish Lamech, and all that kind of stuff. So, and we're all familiar with Noah.
Well,
So yeah.
the reason I was asking this the way I was is that when you had the line up with 65 years of Enoch
Yeah.
and 187 of Methuselah
Yeah.
to come to the 252.
Yeah.
And we're working on this with the 182 and the 595.
Yeah.
Is there a significance in this 777-day period to the 182?
Okay. So the question is, if we go back to November 9th, 2019,
Right.
and then we just count 182 days, we come to May 9th, 2020.
Okay.
Now, part of the problem here is not everybody's familiar with the significance of that date. But if you look at the Julian date in 2020, May 9th is what Julian date?
I'm not recalling, but how could that be May 9th if 187 takes us to July?
No, 252 takes us to July 18th.
Okay. All right. My fault.
Yeah. So it brings us to May 9th, and May 9th is April 26th. It's the 26th day of the fourth month.
Okay.
Okay. So that's significant. Okay. So there's significance in May 9th for me personally. It was when I was first married in 1981. So it's part of our lines as well, my anniversary. Now it's also the 15th day of the second month, which would be the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. If you're in the second Passover, if you would observe the second Passover.
Right.
And we take the second Passover as a symbol of this movement to some degree, correct?
Right.
Right, because that has to do with Hezekiah when he has his second Passover, where the priests cleanse the temple for 8 days and the Levites for 8 days. And then you're going to have, because they didn't get it cleansed in time to keep the Passover, that is, it's not done until the 16th, basically first fruits, they're going to have a second Passover, and they're going to invite northern Israel to this second Passover. And that's what this movement is doing, correct?
Right.
So there's all kinds of symbols connected with this second Passover. Now, this is the 15th. So this would be the day after the Passover proper, but this would be the Feast of Unleavened Bread if you're observing a second Passover, as a nation especially. So they didn't observe the one in the first month, they observe it in the second month. But it's also April 26th, Julian, and May 9th, Gregorian. So there is definitely a significance there in this line for that date. And that's a really good point that you brought out there. Now, I know we're doing lots of chronology today, which was not really my intent.
Right.
Because I wanted to not so much go over some of this chronology as much as I find it fascinating, but really is to, in this study of the sanctuary, what I really want people to see in this is that we're going to have, now, of course, we know it's an ark is not the Ark of the Covenant, but Noah's going to build an ark, and which is a box, right? And is there any parallel between the ark that Noah builds and the Ark of the Covenant?
Well, they both contain elements of God's creation.
Okay, so they both contain something. Now, most importantly, Noah's Ark, what does it contain? What's the
Life.
most important cargo in Noah's Ark? Everybody still there?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would say it'd be Noah's family, but also the animals too.
Okay, so Noah's family is the most important cargo. Now the animals are there because obviously Noah's going to need these animals. And these animals are part of the creation. In that creation week, remember, God created these animals. And now these animals are going to be preserved. 7 of the clean animals, 7 pairs of clean animals. Some people say it's just 7 of each of the clean animals, but I take it as 7 pairs. And then two of each of the unclean animals. Now, of course, the focus to me is on Noah, and there's 8 people. 8 is a symbol of the resurrection. And is this a baptism? Is the flood a baptism?
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Baptism of the earth by
Yeah,
water.
Yeah. And then we know that the earth was baptized by water, and it's going to be baptized by fire eventually. Right? So we have these symbols here that are redemptive symbols, this flood. Now, in working out this chronology of the flood and taking this as the 600th year of Noah's life, not counting the year in the way that the Jews counted it later in the time of the Exodus, but counting it how they would have counted it before they had a start to the year. That is, they didn't number the months until the Exodus. Then they begin to number them with the month in the spring there of Adar becoming the first month. But before that, they never numbered the months. But they are numbered in the story of Noah. But they're numbered in relationship to Noah's 600th year. Now, in working out that calendar of the days, and it was a laborious period of a couple of months that it took us to work through this, me personally, and then our Bible study group in Warburg, working on this, that we finally came to the conclusion of when the flood was as a date. And that date, what we used for the time that the door of the ark closed on the 10th day of the second month, we actually took, according to the biblical calendar, as being the 10th day of the 7th month. That is, it was the Day of Atonement. And is the Day of Atonement connected with the closed door?
I would think yes.
Adelaide talks about this closed door, talking about in Millerite history. And she goes back and she says there was the closed door in the day of Noah, right? And she lists off these different closed doors. But one of them she lists off is the flood. Now, I was presenting this in Eatonville for the first time with my charts that I had made, and I had PowerPoints. And for the first time, I actually noticed the Julian date of the 10th day of the 7th month on the biblical calendar, that is the 10th day of the 2nd month in Noah's 600th year, has a Julian date. And I hadn't noticed it, even though I had worked out this chart. And I noticed it in my presentation that it was the 22nd of October. So the fact that the door of the ark closed on October 22nd on the 10th day of the 7th month, I would think is very significant. And that I didn't plan it out that way, that it just happened, that I didn't even notice it until I presented it. Now, this becomes a very powerful symbol because the shut door on October 22nd, 1844, on the 10th day of the 7th month, it's now tied to the shut door in 390 BC on October 22nd on the 10th day of the 7th month. Now, when I'm calculating the calendar there in that history, I'm actually using a different way. And I'm trying to think, I think I've said the date wrong. It's 3,000, what am I doing? It's 2,390. There we go. So I'm gonna go back here. Let's go this way. I'm looking at a calendar converter and I'm just gonna see what this calendar converter does, because I don't know if I've even looked at it. So just hang on a second, I have to do some calculations. Any thoughts while I'm doing some calculations?
I'm still thinking about all this with the two lines. I mean, I'm understanding the 777. I mean, I find it interesting because when we bring this down with this beginning on the 9th of November, I'm having to ask if that's not a symbol of like a close of probation coming upon the movement, just like September 11, 2001 was a close of probation on the leadership of the Adventist Church.
Okay, so you're asking, well, we have a close of probation here. I'm just going to show my, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and let's see if we can sort of tie this together. So it's actually 2391 BC, October 22nd. Now you'll see here, it shows the 11th day of the 7th month. Because when we're doing the calendar here, we're not looking at each month and calculating it. We're actually, with the biblical calendar, we're always starting on the first day of the first month, going 3029, 3029, 3029, and so on. But here, I actually am going to use each literal month because they don't have that Exodus calendar set up at the time of Noah. And so I make the assumption that the calendar that Noah is using is based upon the moon, not upon, that means every month is determined. And so when I had to figure out all the different months and the spans of time, the only way that I could fit it in was to make it that it was in 2391, on the 10th day of the 7th month, that the door of the ark closed, for all the spans of time to work out. So it's rather involved. It's not a very simple task to show this. But the fact that it ended up as October 22nd to me was a witness that I was correct. And other things have since come that I was correct. Yeah, so 2391, Iran's noticing that it's 391. Whether that's significant or not with the 2 at the beginning, I don't know. But on the Julian year, that's the year that it is, 2391 BC. And one of the things you see also is that it's a Saturday. And when I'd worked out the story of the flood and the calendar, it was really interesting that week is a Saturday to Saturday. And also the weeks that they let out the ravens, they're letting them out on the first day of the week, the raven and the dove. And those periods are weeks based upon the weekly cycle. So the fact that the weeks worked out as being actual weeks of creation, to me seemed very significant as well. The chances of those types of things occurring randomly were not very likely. So I had all these kind of witnesses in how that I'd worked this out that to me were very convincing, but also showing that God was leading in how we were understanding the calendars before we had everybody in the movement understanding them or trying to understand them. Just for me personally, it was quite amazing. Now you asked this question, so I'm going to go here to 2019, and I'm going to go to November. Well, I guess we got to go on the Gregorian. So we go to November 5th, and I'm just going to go here. I'm going to go save. That's just going to give me the date down here. And then I'm going to go 182. And that's going to bring me to that May 9th date. So I go save and you'll see it's 182. Now I need to go how many more numbers to get to December 25th, 2021? It was 595, right? And that brings me to December 25th. Now, what if I go back 182? I haven't tried this. So I come to June 25th, 2020. Oops, I went the wrong way. 182. Whoops. I didn't go back. I went forward. Okay, so now I'm going to go back. And again, I get to June 26th, 2021. That was kind of interesting. Any significance of, anybody understand any significance about June 26, 2021, whether this is just, I just wanted to see what happened if I went back 182 days. So it gives me there. Gives me there. So we have significance the one direction, but not the other. So we can kind of agree on that point. Maybe there's some significance in this the other way. But anyway, the point is we're just going to do it this way, right? 182, and then we go 595. So what is your point then, Dwight, again? Can you kind of repeat what you were saying about this?
Okay, the point that I was trying to make, we recognize that September 11, 2001 was a close of probation for the leadership of the church.
Okay.
So my question is November 9th or 11/9 a symbol of a closing probation within the movement?
Okay, so you ask a good question. Now, back in 2018 at the camp meeting, so after when even before Tess had given us November 9th. I'd already done the Week of Christ study in Canada, beginning on August, I think it was August 6th to 11th, that I did the study there in Canada. And Jeff heard it, and that's when he invited me to come down to Arkansas to help with Brian, and that I could also teach at the school, that I'd be able to present some of these things. So that's what I presented at the school. So this is before we hear anything about what Tess was doing. So the Mayan date 11/9, okay, what I think that was Iran was talking about. When we look at here, these two numbers for that June 26th is 11/9, those first two numbers. We also have an 8/11 in there too, 8/11/9, but those first two numbers, that's the day count and 20-day count. So that 11 represents 220 days. Is that significant?
Well, I mean, when we're looking at this, I mean, we're looking at the biblical calendar 6066 for the year.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we're
that-
looking at 15th day of the third month.
Mm-hmm. Which is 153.
Right.
Yeah. So there are symbols in here. And there is a significance in June 26th, but that one's a little bit sort of tricky. So I don't want to go into that. But anyway, the point is we have these, we have symbols that show up this way. Now you're talking about this close of probation. So I was going back to the Week of Christ study, and when I addressed it at the camp meeting, I'd already understood that the Week of Christ study was about the close of probation. That is, it was symbolizing this close of probation, and it was connecting us to the year 2019. So the Week of Christ had tied us to the year 2019 for certain events, even before I heard about Tess's, November 9th, 2019. So I'd already singled out 2019 is connected to this. But the thing that I showed is that it wasn't the close of probation as we normally think of the close of probation. Let him that is righteous be righteous still. Let him that is filthy be filthy still. But it was really about a shut door. And shut doors, even though they're a type of close of probation, they're only a close of probation for the wicked. That is, Noah was there in a shut door, and the wicked are destroyed. They've closed their probation. Oh yeah, the 391.5 on the Julian day. That's interesting. Okay, interesting. So what we have is this. So what I argued is that it was the close of probation for the false priests. Even October 22nd, it didn't make him that is righteous, righteous still. November 9th did not mean that we're going to stop sinning and that we're going to be living in the time of without a mediator, right? That doesn't happen on November 9th, but it is a closed door, right? So I sometimes prefer the term a closed door just because it closes out the wicked, and that's very, very clear. But this is the point that we're now getting to. We're tying this closed door in October 22nd back to the flood, but we're also tying this closed door to November 9th, 2019. So we tie it into our line that begins a period of 777 days. In Noah's, it ends with a period of 777. Well, the symbol is 777 years. It doesn't end with that. That 777 years is going to end 5 years before the flood. And what's the significance of the 5 years? What does the 5 years symbolize?
Well, the first question I would have is that something along the lines of the wise virgins, but
It is connected, definitely. So the foolish and the wise. Now, we also know when Jacob enters Egypt, how many years are left in the famine? What does he tell Pharaoh?
what does Jacob tell him or what does Joseph?
5 years.
No, Jacob. Jacob tells Pharaoh
Okay, 5 years.
that is 5 years, right? Because he's talking to the Pharaoh about himself, how old he is and so forth. I believe, I think I'm getting it right. You know, because that's in Genesis chapter.
Wasn't he telling his father that? Or
No, I always thought it was Jacob. Jacob said to Pharaoh, Genesis 47:9, the days of the years of my life of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil are the days of the years of my life have been. Maybe and Joseph married his father. So maybe it's not there. Maybe I'm trying to find this here. Or I'll do it the simple way. Search 5 years. Okay, so that's going to be Genesis. Okay, you could be right. This is yeah, this is Joseph telling his brothers. So I was getting the two confused. So I was wrong. And there I will nurse thee. This is Genesis 45:11. There I will nurse thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. So that's the 5 years. So yeah, it's and it's in Genesis 45:6, where also it says, for these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. So again, that's Joseph talking to his brothers. So I was wrong. Okay, so the 5 years though of the famine that are left. Remember, we did a study where we showed that those 5 years represent the period from 34 AD to 1798. That is, it's 5 times 252, or 5 times. I'm doing that. What am I doing? So you're going to go 5 years is 1260. Oh, it's going to be 7. So you got the 2 years represent from 34 AD to 538, and the 5 years represent from 538 to 1798. That's how it works. So there's 7 times 252. There's 7 years of famine. The 7 years of plenty is Christ's week, and the 7 years of famine is the period of persecution, first by pagan Rome, then by papal Rome. So the 5 years represent the 1260. And does that make sense if we look at the story of Noah?
That's an interesting thought.
Okay. So there's this period of time. It's and we it's hard to say exactly all the things that happened, but with the death of Lamech, you have 5 years before the flood, and we don't know all the details of how things happened, but definitely that 5 years becomes a pivotal period of time in which Noah has probably completed the ark and is still urging people to come into the ark. He's preaching all through that time. But as the closer they get to that period, it's going to be significant. So maybe I'm making too much of the 5 years, but I think it's significant as a symbol. One is the foolish and the wise. And so people have the opportunity in that 5 years to make a choice. Are they going to be on the ark or not? Of course, they have a choice for 120 years as well.
Right.
Okay, so we have some interesting things that we found here. Now, in tying this all together as far as the sanctuary, and I haven't decided where I'm going to go next, though I think I'm going to touch on the next story that I want to touch on is the story of Abraham. So, I mean, that's kind of what comes next. There is the story of, in Genesis chapter 5, you got all the generations and everything like that. I don't really want to go through that. The Tower of Babel, I could go through that. But really what I want to get to is Abraham and the aspects of Abraham that relate to the sanctuary. And really, we're going to work our way all the way up to the offering of Isaac. So if we want to understand the sanctuary, I mean, definitely we could go through every chapter here if we wanted to, because there are things that we're going to find. But the most important next step, I think, is to go to the story of Abraham. So we dealt with the story somewhat of Noah. We didn't go into detail, and I could probably spend a lot of time dealing with that as well, all the different spans of time and going through that. But I don't want to do that because we're just doing this on Fridays, not every day. But in looking at the story of Abraham, we're going to see that a lot of the things that are addressed by the sanctuary later on are tied to the story of Abraham, both by a chronological chiasm, so it's connected chronologically, but also thematically. So the events in Abraham's life create the basis for the wilderness sanctuary, if I can say that. Now, one of the things interesting about this, because if you read modern scholarship, which I advise people not really to do, but I grew up with it, they believe in the development of the Abrahamic religion. That is, the Jewish religion was a development from a more primitive form of religion, because everything goes from a primitive form to a more complex form like humanity, right? If you're an evolutionist, and they look at the same way with languages and religion and so forth. But part of the problem with the evolutionary aspect of religion is the maturity of what we see in the story of Abraham. That we don't see something what I would call primitive. That is, the story of Abraham has elements that are extremely deep and philosophical that really show an understanding of God that, if you were going to look at it from an evolutionary point of view, is well in advance of where it should be. Now, they try to argue that the whole story of Abraham is basically cleaned up from some old myth, legend, and cleaned up by modern Judaism. But the evidence is very strong that that's not the case. When you look at the archaeology, you look at the story, the language, the events, and the more we learn, the more we know that the story of Abraham happened when it says it happened, and happened in the way that it happened, that it's not something that could be made up later. If they had made it up later, it would be full of what we call anachronisms. That is, all kinds of things would be out of place. They would not have happened in those times. And some people try to claim things like, well, there's camels in the story, but they now know that camels existed in that part of the world at the time of Abraham. But it was just a belief that people had that they were much later. So there isn't the anachronisms, but also there's these powerful symbols that we can understand that nobody could have understood until the present day. That becomes to me the most powerful aspect here, is that a book that was written a long, long time ago is speaking to us today in ways that we could not possibly have imagined in this structure. So the story of Abraham is going to give us this basis for the sanctuary and for the wilderness sanctuary, and also Solomon's temple, which is going to be built on the very site where Abraham offers up Isaac. So there just becomes a whole bunch of powerful things in God's word that we're going to see in connection with the sanctuary. So I'm just trying to let you know that's what we're going to look at next week. Now, any final things that we should tie up from these first 5 books of Moses, or first 5 chapters of Genesis, I mean. I'm just looking at the first 5 books of Moses here. First 5 chapters of Genesis. Any other points?
Well, since I missed a little bit at the beginning, I'm going to go back over it later. So I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and the part that we dealt with at the beginning was just basically a bit of a review dealing with the curses, both of the curse of the ground, which was thorns and thistles with Adam, and then the land would not yield its strength with
Right.
Cain, and then connected that then to Leviticus 26. So you probably caught the end of that idea. So, but yeah, but you listen to it over again, you might catch up on something. There might be something that you noticed that I didn't notice. So, and if you do notice it, remember to send me an email. Okay, so I thank everyone for the study, and I wish you all a happy Sabbath. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so very thankful for the Sabbath that's coming, for the blessings of this past week, for the light that shines upon our path, and for your angels' care and protection. Help us, Lord, to continue to trust in you, to grow and to learn of the meekness and lowliness of Christ. And we pray, Lord, for each person in their personal struggles. Thank you for the Sabbath again, for the blessing of fellowship. We pray that the events on this day coming up will be another part in the work that you are doing, not just in us individually, but for this movement. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.